Looking forward to telling you a little bit about my work and thoughts on this problem. Sort of titled this talk, Cultivating Wisdom, which is a funny thing for me to title this talk because I'm not a wisdom scholar. But in my defense, increasingly I wish I were. The reason for this turn of events, for this growth in jealousy of this awesome field is sort of a turning point. And it's a turning point in my career that came from kind of an unusual place. And I want to tell you that story today. And that unusual place requires us going back and talking a little bit about a problem, a social problem of which many of you might be aware. Crime and violence is sort of a central part of the problem of poverty, both in the United States, where if you go to some of the poorest neighborhoods in the inner city, the defining trait of those neighborhoods, sometimes even more above and beyond poverty, is crime. It's also true globally. Sort of millions of people are murdered worldwide, and the people who are murdered or feel the effects of crime and violence are almost always coming from poorer countries and the poorest within those poor countries. So having been interested in poverty, it's hard not to sort of start thinking about crime. To make it concrete, let me tell you about something that happened in 2012, basically only a few blocks from where my office is at the University of Chicago. At about 3 in the afternoon, two groups of teens were sort of, jostling with each other, verbally, sort of woofing at each other, if you will. And the point of contention was whether someone in one of the groups had stolen a bike from someone else in the other group. So it's kind of a tense type of situation, but the tension sort of dies down and the two groups start to separate. But in that moment of separation, someone pulls out a handgun and fires. The bullet hits Jamal Lockett, a 16-year-old, in the chest. He is then raced by an ambulance and pronounced dead at Northwestern's emergency room hospital. 2 weeks later, the county state attorney presses charges for the shooter of first-degree murder. And the shooter is also just a kid, 17 years old. This isn't an unusual case, sadly. Chicago police data shows us that nearly 3/4 of homicides stem from this kind of altercation. If I was to add color, it's really an argument over basically nothing that then ends in tragedy. So the fact that they are kids, really, and the fact that it is kind of really an awful kind of situation has led people to try and do something about it. And there are many efforts we have to curb youth violence. There are programs that try to create mentorship. There are programs that try to instill in kids social skills, like teach them like how to be moral effectively, like, this is what it means to care about the people around you. There are programs that try to teach kids self-control, like, don't act out, don't. And I think the following is fair to say. If you simply look at these programs with regression, you tend to find they look like they're working. But sadly, it's an optical illusion about who selects into these programs. Careful randomized control trials have almost uniformly been pessimistic. This is hard to change. That's the background. So at about this time, I started working or heard about this amazing program that Sarah Heller, Jens Ludwig, and a few other collaborators of mine were studying. This is a program called BAM, Becoming a Man. And what they found was that this program in large randomized control trials had noticeably large effects. So this program on the treatment kids, the kids randomly assigned into it, increased school going. But more than that, look at how much it decreased arrests. It had decreased violent arrests a lot. And other arrests quite a bit. You just don't see effects this big. And you might think that perhaps this program is effective because they've sort of ended up doing, working in neighborhoods where it's kind of easier to get these effects. So this is where the neighborhoods where they're working on. And the dots indicate the neighborhoods and the colors indicate the homicide rate. So you can see these programs are pretty much in the highest homicide rate areas, some of the toughest neighborhoods to be a kid in Chicago. So you might also think that, okay, fine, within those programs, they're working because they cream skimmed the kids that they're working with. But 1.73 is a good number that really woke me up. That's the GPA of the average kid in the program. So a 2 is a C. This is well below a C grade average for the average kid. 35% is the number of kids who had been arrested by the time they entered the program. These are the toughest neighborhoods, and these are some of the toughest kids, and you're seeing large randomized control trials. Not in an when I say large, I don't mean, oh, there's like 100 people in treatment and control. That you'll often see in some of these programs. The truth is, even if you find something significant there, it's just so low sample. It's unlike, this is randomly assigned 3,000 children. This is a huge program, huge treatment control. And you might say, well, that's one program. There are flukes. That's why we have a 5% significance level. So there was a second version of this program that was run not in schools, but run in Cook County Detention Center, Juvenile Detention Center. Now, there's so much crime in Chicago that when a juvenile commits a crime, odds are this is tragic. They don't have the space to hold them. So to end up in detention, you had to have committed some very serious offenses and had serious criminal records in the past. And this program was different too, because it was delivered inside the jail, not by trained sort of program providers, but instead by detention center guards who were trained, but their primary job was they were guards. So what did this program do? Here's the treatment control that you see here. The red is the program. I'm colorblind, so I should have picked a color I can recognize, but the other one is the control. And you'll see as months from release, look how 14 months later, how they're still significantly less likely to be rearrested in juvenile detention. This is a huge drop in rearrest rates of the same program. So to summarize, there's a program like Becoming a Man, which has several fully powered experiments delivered differently by different ways with large effects, even in several year follow-ups. And since then, there have been a few other RCTs of these type of programs that have shown equivalently large effects in Chicago. So what is this thing doing? Now, you'll notice I haven't used the phrase which was on a previous slide, which I do not like. These programs are sometimes called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I think that is a terrible phrase. I love CBT, the therapeutic intervention for depression, anxiety, etc. These programs, they draw to a degree from those, but ultimately they're not therapeutic. There is no notion that there's something wrong with this kid. Instead, I'll illustrate what they do with the first sort of exercise, or one of the first exercises they do with the children. So when the kids come in, it's called ball in the fist, ball in the fist. When the kids come in, they're lined up in two rows and they're paired off. One of the pairs in each pair, one of the kids in each pair is given the ball and said, here's the ball. The other kid is told, your job is to get the ball from the other kid. Now, you can imagine this program is run with a bunch of adolescent males who have a period off from some class to come do this thing. I mean, they're hepped up and they're told, you need to get the ball from this other kid. It's you could imagine they're going to like go at it. So then the instructor says, the only rule is there are no rules, go. And the kids start like, grabbing and pulling and pushing and, trying to tease them. It's a lot of physical mayhem. couple of minutes later, the whistle is blown and the instructor says, all right, who got the ball? First fact you should know is that almost nobody gets the ball. If somebody doesn't want to give you the ball in their fist, you're not getting it. But that's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise comes next. The counselor then says, how many of you asked for the ball? Dead silence. The kids kind of know what's up now, but the instructor wants to drive it home and says, why didn't you ask? So one kid sheepishly will say, well, they wouldn't have given it to me if I had asked. That's why I didn't ask. Of course, that's not true. They didn't ask because they didn't think of it. So the instructor wants to drive that point home. So they turned to that kid's pair and said, hey, if you'd been asked for the ball, what would you have done? And the kid inevitably says, I'd have given him the ball. It's just a fucking ball. I don't care. I just got it a couple of minutes ago. And the exercise opens the eyes of these kids to realize I entered this situation. I had an automatic thought as to what I should do. I didn't step back and reflect whether that was the best course of action. I simply went ahead and did it. The whole class, and there are lots of moving parts, but our hypothesis is that the whole program, all of these programs, they induce children to reflect in the moment and step back from the situation a little bit more. So how do we test that? Beyond the RCT results we have, we ran a little game, and this is a game that we cribbed from a design from Nick Epley, Boaz Kaisar, James Vandermeer, and Christine Hosey from their paper. So in this game, kids play a dictator game where they're paired with the Confederate, and the participant is told that you have $10 and the Confederate can take some of the money away. And in this case, the Confederate takes $6 away of the 10. Then participants are told it's their turn to respond to this. The Confederate has 10, how much will you take away? And in these games, the question is, do you escalate? Like someone has just taken $6. Are you going to take 6, take less, or escalate? And our interest is not in whether they escalate. That's what Vandermeer et al. Did. We're interested in how they decided, because this is a heated moment. This person screwed you. What do you do? If the training that we had talked about did what we thought it did, the kids in those heated moments should step back a little bit and take a pause. And in fact, the BAM kids who were in the treatment took many more seconds to respond than the control kids who were not. So BAM works by getting you to reflect. And the power of reflection is what I really took away from this. And if you go back for a minute and go back to that story I told you, those kids who are simply, arguing. If the kid who pulled this gun, in that moment, he's like, who are these guys? I mean, I don't know exactly what happened, but in this head, who are these guys? I'm just gonna show them that I'm not gonna be pushed around. But if that kid had paused for a second and said, wait, that's what I think I should do, but should I? Things would be very different. One of the guards at Cook County Juvenile Detention says this thing, which I always have stayed with me. He said, all the kids in here, if you looked at their lives like it was a movie, all you'd have to do is edit out 15 seconds in the movie and their lives would be completely different. And they'd be like everyone else you know and not here in jail. 15 seconds, that's the power of reflection. And to me, BAM is not just an intervention. It's actually a window into how we can cultivate a certain form of wisdom. Because these kids, I would argue, are in fact wiser as a result of this program. It's also a window into the challenges of poverty. See, one way to think about poverty that this program helped me see is that picture you're a kid in Englewood, a very tough neighborhood, and you're walking to school. And a bigger kid says to you, hey, give me your phone. What should you do? Well, what you should do if you don't want to get into a cycle of always being picked on and then really end up with a terrible life is you should say, fuck you. But now imagine the same kid is in school milling around before math class and the teacher says, hey, sit down before we can start class. What should you do here? Now, you'll notice both of these are actually quite analogous situations. It is someone in a position with power over you trying to assert that power. So if your response is automatic and you're finely tuned to the first situation, you will tell your teacher, fuck you, and that will have consequences. To give the right response here requires triaging, to have a little bit more reflection on what is this situation? How is it? It's not to have one automatic response for all things. If you think about that, one of the benefits of being rich is that you only face a homogeneous set of situations for pretty well-off kids. Someone in a position of authority tells you to do something, you do it. That's what you do. Poverty demands more reflection. In tough circumstances, you can't afford systemic automaticity. I can afford it. Poverty actually imposes greater demands. It requires you be wiser. It requires that you reflect more. As I said, this program was a turning point in me. And it was a turning point because I started to realize, wait a minute, I could use the tools from this program. And I started changing how I think. And so for me, this program is a very personal note, which is these kids, they need this. And it makes such a big difference in their lives. I need it too, not at the same consequential level, but none of us get this kind of training. And when I started adopting it, I was a different person. I've changed dramatically in these last 5 to 7 years exactly because of this program. So let me conclude my story on one bigger reflection myself on the question of wisdom and morality, which I know is one of the things that you want to talk about. There are many people who feel that violence is a morality problem, that when somebody commits a crime like murder, it reflects failed values. And as a result, many programs for these kids try to teach social values. But in the results you just saw, that program never, ever once said to you what the right thing to do was. All it did was try to cultivate in you a habit of mind to step back and reflect a little bit more. The wisdom here does not come from the acquisition of morality. These kids are already moral. And in fact, when you talk to these kids, they're as moral as anyone you're going to talk to. They're simply better at expressing their morality in these rough circumstances because of this program. And that's maybe what I'll leave with you is that I think for me, wisdom in many places is less about the acquisition of morality than about the cognitive tools to implement the latent morality that we all feel already. Thank you.